There are two things that I like to say to people I just met. First thing, hi! What can I tell you? It's a classic. But the second thing, do you Sega Saturn? Reason I ask is because for me, playing Sega Saturn after years of not changed my life in the made it way better kind of way. Now, I don't pretend to be a humanitarian or anything, but it only seems logical to seek this kind of life improvement out for others besides myself. And to be frank, I don't care if they're strangers. Problem is, sometimes I've barely gotten past the hi part before they start running. But not to worry, they usually don't get very far. And I'd like to think Sega Saturn would be proud. Here's the thing, when somebody who loves Sega Saturn hears somebody else say they love it, you stop what you're doing, you get up and you fist pump. You just do. And yeah, I know there's other great consoles, but most of them weren't ignored and or passed over the way the Sega Saturn was back in the day, relative to how much people love it now. Consoles like the, hate to say it, but Atari Jaguar kind of deserved to fail back in the 90s. Actually, do I hate to say that? But the Saturn, while it could be argued that it sort of deserved to fail based on some marketing and business decisions, it didn't deserve to fail because of the actual console and game library, and let's not forget that sweet, sweet controller. Plus, the console actually did just fine in Japan. Did you know that in Japan, the Saturn actually outsold the Genesis, called the Mega Drive there? And while I'm spitting facts, did you know that jellyfish don't have butts and therefore don't poop? And there you are sitting there thinking you know stuff. In a lot of ways, the Saturn embodies the heart of what retro gaming is all about. Going back and discovering awesome things that we missed the first time around. Not to mention, many of the Saturn's strengths as a game console are things most of us would say we like. Good arcade games, good 2D games, good Sega games, lots of pick up and play games. If you're a retro gamer and don't like any of those things, then what do you like? Nestled within the middle of the 90s, a time period most retro gamers are fond of, odds are the Saturn has something for you. If it doesn't, I'm not gonna hunt you down or anything, at least not more than once, but I get it, there's plenty of options for retro gaming without feeling like you need to depend on any one console. But because the console gets so overlooked even today, I'm gonna try to hype it up, which, try as I might, for many people, the idea of Sega Saturn comes to a screeching halt with the prices of the games. My quick reaction to this is usually, not everyone needs Burning Rangers, Magic Knight Rayearth, and Panzer Dragoon Saga. Sure, it's unfortunate that the console has some terrifyingly expensive games, but I mean, so does literally every console worth a darn, and even some of the ones worth less than a darn. And yet, the Saturn is enough to scare people into hiding. I had a friend who looked up the price of Mega Man 8 one time, and yeah, I don't know where he is, his family doesn't know where he is, nobody does. But don't worry, I've set out a trap, the Japanese version, a fraction of the cost, and a snack, although the snack disappeared. I don't know where it went. Unfortunately, Japanese games can scare people too, making them think, Japanese games? What do you think I am, Japanese? Those versions probably have all sorts of crazy stuff, like Japanese. But worry not, I'm one of the most English-dependent doofuses you'll find, and I do just fine with the collection of Japanese games for the console. For starters, most of them either don't require reading or have lots of English in them anyways. The only games where you're really out of luck are typically story-heavy RPGs, which can be a tease because they usually sell for pennies on the dollar. It motivates some people to learn Japanese just so they can take advantage. Oh, and learning another language is probably useful for other parts of your life too, like reading Japanese game manuals. In any case, it's hard to be a Sega Saturn collector without Japanese games. Besides having much cheaper versions of their US counterparts, some of them don't even have US US counterparts. Since the console performed better in Japan, naturally it also received more games. Playing Japanese games is easy too, with the more popular options being these action replay carts that also add extra RAM for certain games, as well as game save storage. And some people will even just buy a Japanese console itself, since, yep, they tend to be more plentiful and cheaper than US systems, and no, you don't have to go to Japan to buy one. Of course, if you really want to save money and don't care about collecting, lots of options there as well, whether it be emulation or setting up your console to play burned discs. Some find this to be a morally gray area, so you'll have to decide that for yourself. Now, while I've already mentioned the types of games that the Saturn excels at, I'd like to delve deeper. The biggest thing the console has going for it to me is that it straddles the line between genres that are well loved and games that were truly original. Nights into Dreams is one of a kind, and the fact that Sega gave the green light to Sonic Team to make this really tells you a lot about how the console was handled. These were the days when Sega encouraged creativity, something that they expanded upon in many ways with the Dreamcast, but I don't know, the Saturn just feels weirder to me, and in all the right ways. A far cry from the more corporate-influenced vibes that many games of today have. A stark contrast, and if you're into retro gaming, it's probably something you're looking for. The Saturn has personality, that's for sure, and yet very approachable. For every genre where the Saturn has a wonky take on it, like Guardian Heroes for the beat-em-up genre, it's also got some great more traditional beat-em-ups, like the Dungeons & Dragons collection. Heck, some people consider those to be the best beat-em-ups ever made. You know, people who didn't grow up with the Ninja Turtles. I'm on Team Cads and Dinos myself, but gotta love all the arcade games you can play on Saturn, whether it's fighting games with a ton of support from Capcom and SNK, who better, its famous library of shoot-em-ups, and of course Sega's own lineup of arcade games, which, by the way, lots of these are relatively cheap, even if you want to buy the US versions. I've always been a fan of the games that come in sleeves for quick pop-it-in fixes of arcade action, and gotta love the way the console embraced 2D games as well, something I'd like to think just about every retro gamer loves. Anybody love retro video games but not 2D games? Now that I've asked, I'm sure there is, but what really hits home for me when it comes to my enjoyment of 2D games for the Saturn is the controller. Specifically, this one. Model 2 in the US, but the only model in Japan. How come they always think we want our controllers bigger here before realizing it's a bad idea? Did you know the original US N64 controller was gonna be like this? But the Saturn controller is perfect. The D-pad is still the best D-pad ever made in my opinion, and having the 6 face buttons is really handy. However you end up playing the Saturn, make sure this controller is part of your setup. That would be my only stipulation. Oh, and while I can get you to do something, give a close friend or family member a compliment. Trust me, they'll love it. Make it the family dog if you have to. In any case, I hope everyone is able to experience the Sega Saturn in some capacity. I'd say it's worth it. Whether you end up deciding to collect for it or not, I do believe it has something for everyone. I understand that a lot of its notable games are pricey, but here's a handful of good games that can all be had for between 10 and 30 bucks if you get the Japanese versions, and even the US versions for some, perfectly reasonable compared to other popular consoles. Only thing wrong with it that I can think of is it can't play Rocket Knight Adventures, and believe me, I've tried. But with all that said, I'd be curious how many of you have already gotten into the Sega Saturn scene, what your thoughts are, as well as whether or not I've been able to convince anybody who has never experienced the console that maybe it is indeed worth checking out. So with that, leave a comment down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's the